So, welcome to the Renewable Energy Hour for tUrn Week with Wind, Solar, and Clean Power, a state-by-state analysis with Stephanie Hughes, who's a chemical engineer and a consultant to California local government agencies and an incredible professor in the Environmental Studies and Sciences Department. She's a senior lecturer here at SCU, and she earned her master's degrees in chemical engineering and environmental engineering from Stanford and has 25 years professional experience as a registered chemical engineer. She enjoys teaching a wide range of courses involving energy, water, waste, and environmental technologies. She has a broad technical experience in air and water quality, including pollutant source characterization, chemical fate and transport, water and wastewater treatment, regulatory permit compliance, and she encourages her students to think about energy, mineral, and water use, as well as the materials and the industrial chemicals we constantly consume, toss out, and flush. Hughes continues to provide consulting services to Bay Area municipalities and utilities. Most of her current work is in water quality, assessing impacts and sources of heavy metals, pesticides, and salts into wastewater and stormwater systems. And she's also been a consultant with water resources planning and design projects for California municipalities, special districts, and including recycled water infrastructure, ocean and inland desalination, permitting compliance, and integrated regional water management plans. So who knows, maybe she's organized the water in your area. She also served as source control manager for the city of Palo Alto, where she initiated a mercury pollution prevention program, developed the Sewer Science High School laboratory program, facilitated a stakeholder analysis of endocrine disruptors in reclaimed water, and co-authored a white paper regarding the environmental fate of triclosan. So, for all those reasons, and more, she's an incredible expert to have with us today, and I want to welcome Stephanie Hughes.
I had no idea you were going to read all that, and that's all the time we have. Questions? Thank you. So as we begin, maybe in the chat, think about, tell me either maybe one or two words to describe what you're thinking as far as renewable energy in the US these days, or maybe guess the percent of energy that's currently coming from renewable energy in the US, just to kind of engage your brain. Like, how are you thinking either? So with a number, how are you thinking about energy, renewable energy in the US, or so for our numbers people? A lot of good guesses. We need more of it. Fair. I will not disagree. Yes. And so we're going to talk about how to have more of it. Great answers. Okay. So what I hope to do today is give you a little bit of background and talk about national policy. We're going to do policy stuff, then nerdy science stuff, which is my most comfortable space, and then we'll go back to policy stuff. So we'll talk about where we've been the last 12 years or so, and then where some of our best national nerds think we can go, and then look at how we might get there. And I've got something for you for the power hour for tonight. Okay, so this is all of our energy sources. This is not just electricity, but heating and cooling and transportation. And so if we're thinking about all of that, renewable energy is about 11%. And you can see that we have quite a lot of fossil fuels, right? But we kind of knew that. If we look just at electricity, so we think about energy and we think about electricity. And then my two studies that we're going to look at do that same kind of thing too. So it's important we think about all our demands, transportation, freight, all that kind of stuff, heating our homes with natural gas, all these different things. But then we also sometimes think about just the electricity world. And so if you think about the electricity world, most of the petroleum goes away because that was for transport of people and material goods and all that. And now it's more nuclear and coal and natural gas. And then the renewables take up a bigger space because that's where our renewables have been focused, is within electricity. So wind and hydropower and things like that. I mean, you see what I've been the first time I taught about energy at Santa Clara was in 2007, and coal was 50% of our electrical then. So it's really changed. It really, really has. But a lot of that, while wind has been part of the takeover there, natural gas with hydraulic fracturing has been the other piece that's taken over quite a bit of that. And meanwhile, as I think many people here in this audience know, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says that we need to reduce the global warming aspect. So we're going to need to pull down our CO2 emissions. There have been a lot of good talks already this week about how to do that in food and other sectors. And so we need to take action on this. As Erin said, we need more renewable energy, and we don't need it. We need it for this purpose, and it's this and. Right? There are so many externalized costs of fossil fuel use. I could spend a whole talk on several of these. From the Deepwater Horizon gush that you see, that was the largest marine oil spill that you see over here, to black lung disease. You would think this would be a disease of the past of coal miners, but no, it is a disease of present. It was a disease of the past and continues. And there are so many impacts on to many people, to indigenous people, to people of color. There's just, it's not sustainable. So Kristen's thinking, what is Stephanie doing with Monsters Inc? Think about Monsters Inc. Most of us probably watched and enjoyed this. What did it start with? It started with using screams for energy, right? That was unsustainable. There was also considerable corporate greed involved, right? It was not a sustainable solution, that energy source. Then when they moved to laughter, that was not only sustainable, but I think they doubled their energy supply, if I remember right. So this is where we need to go. The Monsters Inc. was indoctrinating us at an early age that we need to go from unsustainable to sustainable energy. So let's do that. So one piece of the puzzle here, how we have started on moving towards reducing emissions from power plants specifically. So I'm going to talk about power plants. We'll talk about transportation a little bit as well. And there are two pieces to this. One piece was the motor vehicle piece, and the second piece was about whether the EPA administrator has authority to regulate CO2. So this is in 2006. So back when I was in school learning about air pollutants and things like that, CO2 was not something that was looked at as a pollutant, because they looked at pollutants that cause things on a human, on a person-by-person scale, it's like asthma and things like that. But in 2007, the Supreme Court said, yes, the EPA administrator has the authority to regulate CO2, carbon dioxide from power plants. So that started the EPA on a path. So let's look at a little bit of this path. So this is that decision right here. Then in 2009, so that said they could regulate it. So then that meant the EPA had to look at it and say, is it a human health impact? So by 2009, they said, oh, yeah. It threatens the health and welfare of current and future generations. So we're going to move down this path. And at the same time, at the Copenhagen conference, we pledged to reduce our CO2 emissions. Good work takes time, right? And so it took to 2014 for the US to draft what is called the Clean Power Plan. And what I liked about the Clean Power Plan was that it didn't force states down particular paths. It recognized that each state is individual, has different opportunities, different challenges. So it said, states, here, you need to develop each individual plan and tell us, the EPA, how you're going to do that. And by 2016, some states began developing their responses to the Clean Power Plan. And I point out Gina McCarthy here, and she's going to come up again later. This is the good news. She was the EPA administrator for Obama and oversaw the completion of that plan. Okay, 2016. What happened in 2016? 2016. Oh, right. Never forget this. So in 2016, while some states were beginning to develop their responses, other states chose to sue the EPA rather than develop their plans. The US Supreme Court then temporarily halted implementation of the CPP that they had kind of, started on this, and said, well, we'll let the lawsuits make their way through the courts and then we'll, re-engage. But meanwhile, notice we go from what I call the US EPA to Trump's EPA. Whew. Wow. Very, very different. So Trump's EPA began to dismantle and replace the CPP. And by 2019, Trump's EPA just repealed and replaced the CPP. And scientists calculated that the replacement plan would then increase CO2 emissions. So to be clear, yes, that really happened. The Supreme Court required the US EPA to regulate CO2. The EPA created a plan to do so, and Trump's EPA said, nope, we're going to increase emissions instead. So that's where we are from a policy place. We were moving forward, and then we took some steps back. We'll talk about where we're going next once we look at the nerds, okay? My people, the nerds, the science nerds. There are policy nerds out there too. I'm this kind of nerd. So these are two, what I see as very visionary documents. We're going to do the one on the left first from the National Renewable Energy Lab, which is part of Department of Energy. They're in Boulder, Colorado, very engineering folks. And then we're going to do one from Jacobson at Stanford in 2015. This 2012 analysis, you're saying, wow, Stephanie, that's 9 years old. Yeah. But it was at the basis for what are now some additional NREL studies that they're doing. This was kind of foundational for them. And you see it says volume 1 of 4. This is like 1,200 pages, and it's all online. You can read all of it. The executive summary is like 40 pages. So they did their homework. And they were looking for 80% renewable electricity. So not all of our energy, just electricity, 80%. So how do we get there? So they looked and they determined that we have a suite of different renewable resources for creating electricity within the US. And I'm going to go through so that you're thinking, well, how do you create electricity from biopower, Stephanie? I think I know what hydropower is. I think I know what photovoltaics are. I don't know what the CSP thing is. Right now, just look at the colors. I'll walk you through each of those really quickly. But first, just look at the colors on these maps. Notice where there's dark color, dark shading versus light. So most places, there's a lot of biopower, whatever that is. There's hydropower in different places. I'm not sure what we think about hydropower. Geothermal, okay. All right, so how do we get electricity from these? For all of them except photovoltaics, it goes down to just one thing. We need kinetic energy somehow. We need some energy source to then run a turbine that then spins a generator that makes electrons that get tossed onto the electrical grid for us. So we need the kinetic energy of wind, or we need heat energy. So a coal-fired power plant, we burn coal to create steam, and that steam has so much energy that it runs that turbine that runs the electric generator. So we go with what we know from coal, and nuclear does the same thing. Coal and nuclear, they run a steam turbine. They use heat to run a steam turbine to run a generator. So that's what we've done. So a lot of these mimic that. You do what you know. So in hydropower, you're using either a reservoir or you're running in the river to drive a turbine. So the kinetic energy of the water and to drive a generator. There's been we have a kind of negative history with a lot of hydropower, a lot of very large dams displacing people, displacing species, impacting habitats. But I want you to realize that there is a growing call for low impact hydro. And in fact, there's this whole nonprofit group that certifies low impact hydro throughout the country. And there's something like 130 facilities that are certified low impact hydro facilities throughout the US right now. And you can see that some of the criteria that must be met for that. So there are ways of utilizing hydropower in a sensitive way. Wind energy, we have abundant wind energy. So that's the kinetic energy of the wind, spinning a turbine, running a generator. And you can see there's onshore and offshore. So you can see, so onshore is literally on land, and offshore, meaning in the waters of the ocean or the Great Lakes. For biopower, so that means it's similar to the concept of coal, in that with coal, we are also burning biopower, right? Kind of. That was organic material, right? That was once alive, that then over millions and millions of years then turned into coal. And we're pulling up millions of year old solar energy, basically, and trying to survive on that. Again, not sustainable. So now we're combusting plant matter and using that to create a steam, to drive a steam turbine to run the generator. There's a number of different resources: agricultural residue, forest harvest residue. There's also what you can see on the lower right, an example of high yield grasses, where we're looking at plant matter that can use very little water, very little fertilizer, grow on what we might think of as marginalized land. So not, we're not talking corn, we're not talking corn here. And then you can see that there's also anaerobic digestion of sewage waste, and we can use that methane to combust. So we have a number of different options there. Geothermal power, most of that is located in the West, because it's a issue of plate tectonics and where the magma is close enough to the surface for us to utilize it. So you need a geothermal reservoir. You need you need steam or hot water to be able to pull it out. And again, that steam energy is just going to run a steam turbine to run a generator. We do it to know. And notice they put the water back into the reservoir so that it can reheat. CSP might be new to some of you, concentrated solar power. That is different from photovoltaics. So this is, there's a number of different designs, but this is one that's pretty popular, where they use these parabolic troughs to heat. So it's sending that heat energy from the sun, not the visible wavelengths, but the infrared wavelengths, and getting that energy to point to a line, point to this, and turn water into steam. And again, you got it, steam turbine, electric generator. You have to have areas that are free from smog, clouds, that kind of thing, because that infrared energy isn't going to get through that. So that's why you see it really looks like it's focused on the Southwest US. And then photovoltaics, we're not doing a turbine and all that, right? It makes electrons right there on the surface with semiconductor materials. And you can, I think the important thing to note here is it can go from, there's many different flavors of this, very different scales, from the rooftop that's right above my head here, that looks like that, to much larger systems. From the National Renewable Energy Lab, we can see that there's quite a selection of these resources. And so then what NREL did was they compared baseline, so baseline for them, which was 2010, where our electricity was coming from. And they looked at a number of different scenarios. Oh man, 1,200 pages, you can do a lot of scenarios. But most of their focus was on 80% renewable. And you can see here, their baseline, there was about something on the order of 50%, a little bit more than 50% coal. and you can see they have it going down, and they have renewables filling that space. What they did not imagine at that time was hydraulic fracturing taking. So this is actually what's really happened is this powder blue has taken over the dark blue. And they were not imagining that. They were imagining both of these fossil fuels going down. So coal has indeed been going down. But as I said earlier, that this is taking up quite a bit of space. But notice they're seeing, let's see, for wind and solar all together, it looks like 50% wind and solar, and then quite a bit of hydropower. But it looks like the hydropower is staying about where it's at. So growing a little bit with a little bit more low impact hydro. Geothermal staying about the same, but biomass going up. So they have biomass and wind and solar going up quite a bit compared to where they were. Now, the next slide I'm going to show you has a lot of data on it, but I'm going to try and help you focus, so don't freak out. It's really great. For science nerds, love things like this. It says so much on this graph when you get into it, but it takes a while to get into it. So first, just notice the difference in colors. So some regions have just a few colors, and focus on, I'm going to have you focus on the left column for each of these graphs. So ignore the right, that's a whole nother discussion. But if you look at, so this is generation for the Northwest, you can see they have both hydropower and onshore wind for the Northwest. Notice like California, we have a suite of options here. We could do quite a bit more geothermal than we're doing. We have wind, we have solar, so we have quite a mix. So again, here's the Northeast. The Northeast has a variety. So some of them have quite a bit more variety than the others. The other thing to notice, look at that dashed line and see what that dashed line means. So what does that mean? Could somebody tell me what you think as far as what regions might be exporters and who might need to be importers based on that dashed line? So it looks like almighty Texas is going to need a few imports.
Yeah.
Looks like Florida is going to need some help, right? Because that dashed line is how much demand for that particular region. California, hey, looks like we got it covered according to NREL. The Great Plains looks like they're capable to make far more energy than demand, and that was assuming biomass and onshore wind. So it looks like they could be net exporters of electrons through a transmission grid to those that need it. So they indeed then looked at the need for additional transmission lines. So you can imagine that these are heading the transmission lines. When you think about our electrical grid, think about it, and it's aging. It's not in the best health right now. And think about it being. I need to come up with a better analogy, because it's not like highways are my favorite thing. But think about this as if our current electrical grid are 2-lane roads or 4-lane roads when you want an 8-lane superhighway in order to be most effective. Because the issue is, especially things like wind and sun, that energy, once those electrons are made, you use them or you lose them. So that's the whole issue of storage. That's a whole nother 1-hour discussion about storage. But you use it or you lose it. So if we have the transmission lines in place, then as we have that wind energy throughout the Rockies, we can send it to where it's needed and not lose it. So we need a lot done. And that was part of their conclusions. They concluded that we can do this. That a highly 80% electrical is something that we're 80% renewable for our electric grid is something that we're capable of, but there's some things that we need. We need increased flexibility of the system to be able to take advantage of the electrons where they're available, when they're available, and move those to other states. So you can see a more infrastructure, technology advances and the like, market rules. So there's policy stuff gets, right? The science nerds can only take these things so far. So, okay, so the NREL study had us getting to 80% renewable electricity. Now let's just blow the doors off of everything, okay? So now the Stanford study, we're gonna look at all of our energy. And we're going to look at only wind, water, and sunlight. No biopower, no burning, none of that. No, we're not going to combust anything. So the Stanford research team said, can we do this? So they looked at every one of the 50 United States and said, how can we do this? How can we get to 100% wind, water, and sunlight? So they looked at electrifying all sectors, including airplanes, everything, your heating, your cooling, everything. And it turns out we get an amazing improved efficiency in that. They look at the footprint for this, for water, wind, and sun. They look at cost. They look at avoided pollution and the associated costs of that. Then they look at jobs and how to get there. So another really wonderful, nerdy study. So first things first, everything goes to electrical. No more heating with natural gas, no more fossil fuels for vehicles, rail cars, anything. Electrify everything. So first I want to say, how do they electrify aircraft? Oh, no big deal. It's called electrolytic cryogenic hydrogen, right? Right? No problem. We got that. You got that. What? Stephanie, what? Okay, electrolytic just means that we produce the hydrogen. Here's the hydrogen down here. We produce it by using clean energy, so wind energy, to bust apart water molecules into hydrogen and oxygen. Right now, you might say, well, that makes sense, but right now, literally 95% of the hydrogen right now that's produced is produced from natural gas. They basically take the methane of natural gas, which has hydrogen on carbon, and they pull the hydrogen away from that. So they're using natural gas to get the hydrogen. Not cool. Not cool. So instead, we want to use electrolytic, where we're using electricity from wind and sun to create hydrogen, which is then going to store the hydrogen that you can then store. And in an airplane, they're going to store it cryogenically, which just means cold. They're going to make that hydrogen, compress it so that it's liquid instead of gas. And look at this. Airbus is planning to do this by 2035. Cool? Cool. Super, super, super cool. I'm so stoked. And M means nautical miles. So, let's jump into the Stanford study a bit. So they start with, so what they do here, so BAU means business as usual. So here we are, 2015 is when they published the paper. If out by 2050, if we did business as usual, this would be our demand. But instead, see this light gray line? This is the reduction in energy demand that the US would need because of moving everything to electric. That just shows how inefficient it is, the petroleum vehicles and the natural gas and all of that. So all these losses. So you eliminate those losses, which means you don't have to produce as much electricity. Then the second gray piece is about end use efficiency. So improving the efficiency of our light bulbs and our vehicles and all of those kinds of things. So then you get down to this point where you don't need as much. So you've gone from 2.4 to 1.5. Cool. And then here's where they say, here's how we're going to get it. So again, so it's not biopower. It's not that. It's all wind, solar, a little bit of hydro, a little bit of geothermal. Because remember, the geothermal is just in some parts of the US. So that's their vision. So based on their vision, this is what our energy supply would look like. So on wind, making up 50% of it, onshore and offshore. PV, making up, let's see, 38%. No, did I do that right? Yeah, 38%. Again, it's at different scales. And then you see almost no tidal, but a little bit, some hydro and some geothermal. And actually the geothermal is like 1.5% and the wave is like 0.5%. So much smaller. And it's amazing. But realize that while the whole US looks like that, each state looks very, very different. So they did it state by state by state, every single state. And why are they so different? Well, for the same kind of reason we saw here. So now we're not looking at biopower anymore, but we're looking at where the wind is and where the CSP power is and where the photovoltaics are, right? Everybody has different options. So you can see the numbers are wildly different for onshore wind versus offshore wind, depending on where you are. So for instance, here's California in 2018. We use a lot of natural gas for our electricity. We're getting a good amount of solar, geothermal, wind. So we have quite a bit of renewables. Here's their Stanford vision for us. So wind going from 7% to 35%. And not only is it jumping to 35%, but now it's, remember, this is all, we've also taken in transportation and all these other things. So not just what we're thinking of electricity for now. And you can see the PV raising up quite a bit. And then we've got concentrated solar power as well. Let's contrast that with Wyoming. Wyoming actually used to be 95% coal, 98% coal. This is a really big change right here in 2018. We're already seeing huge change. It's amazing. Here's Stanford's vision. The Jacobson team vision for Wyoming. I can put this link in the chat at the end. I have, I'll show you what it looks like in case there's a nerd out there that wants to look at this later. If you do, you can, it's a state by state of the 2018 data versus the table from the Jacobson study for 2050. So I'll put that in the chat at the end if somebody wants to look at their favorite state, if your favorite state wasn't California or Wyoming. This is the footprint that they estimate. So 0.4% of the US lands. For some context, lawns represent 1.3% of US lands, livestock, 33% of US lands. And for wind, the little red dot and the little white dot are how much land the turbines themselves would take versus the fact that you have to space out the turbines. So those are the larger circles, but those can be done in places where there's other things. In fact, they can be done on those livestock ranges in Wyoming and Texas and such. In addition, they looked at job creation. So you can see quite a bit of construction jobs as well as operational jobs. And they looked at job losses, and so it outweighed the job creation, outweighed the job losses. They also looked at improved life expectancy. Remember, by burning fossil fuels, we're putting a lot more emissions into the air besides just carbon dioxide. And those are causing premature deaths throughout the United States. So they estimated a reduction in those losses of life of 46,000 people a year. Then they have avoided costs from the reduced mortalities. They put a dollar amount on every human and figured out how much cost would be avoided from that. And then eliminating global warming costs to the world, so avoiding mitigation costs. And so that results in every person in the US saving $260 in energy costs. And then the US health and global costs also decreasing. Stanford recommends a number of policy steps. So now I'm going to move back to the policy, because how do we get here? How do we get to this nerd utopia? And what I think is really nice, and I want the students here to be realizing, is a lot of these are controlled by state, regions, or cities. So if you are involved in a nonprofit, an NGO, or you're working in a city office or a state or regional, there are so many things that this is empowering. This isn't something that goes from the top down. It goes this way. Okay, clean energy standards, promoting energy efficiency in buildings, streamlining permitting processes. The US, it costs in the US sometimes something like 4 to 5 times more to put up photovoltaic panels than it does in Germany. And most of it's not because the technology costs are different, it's because of the permitting costs. Ridiculous. That's got to change. Look, promoting public transit and biking and walking infrastructure. That again, that's something that gets done locally through nonprofits and public-private partnerships, all these different things. So there are so many jobs and opportunities for everybody here. Permitting again for electric charging stations, and then electrifying our rail. So there's a number of different things. Let's start with this one. Here's the good news. Clean energy standards have been adopted through the US. 30 states have passed laws requiring utilities to use more clean energy. 16 states have adopted goals of 100% clean electricity standards. 170 cities, and more than 1/3 of us already live somewhere where our government has committed to 100% clean power. Here's a map of where those renewable and clean energy standards are. Notice little red Wyoming here hasn't created a renewable energy standard, but I'm okay with that. They just doubled their wind energy capacity just last year, 2020, the year of the pandemic. They were out there doubling their wind capacity. Not bad, Wyoming, not bad at all. And wind is just going through the roof, people. I mean, here's what it looked like in 1999 when some of you here were just born or not yet even born. And here's what it looks like now. And if you think just simply, you can think about 1,000 megawatts, because I know you don't like some of these numbers. Just think of 1,000 megawatts as being like equivalent of a coal-fired power plant, like one big plant. It's not quite right, but it's close enough. So this is like two big power plants. And this is like more than 100 coal-fired power plants. So coal's going away, wind's coming up. Cool, cool, cool. All right, how about on a national level? I've seen a picture of her before. Look at her, Gina McCarthy. Huh. Biden understands the issue here. We are back in reality. Again, elections have consequences. His White House is filled with alumni from the Obama administration that were involved in the Clean Power Plan and learned some lessons. Gina McCarthy is now the first ever White House National Climate Advisor. Woot. He has an infrastructure plan that's hit the streets recently, and it includes a national clean electricity standard, and his goal is 100% clean electricity by 2035. His plan also calls for an overhaul of the electric transmission grid. You can see that the American Society of Civil Engineers have given us a C- report card in our energy infrastructure. And this would also give us that opportunity to turn some of those 2-lane highways into super highways and get that transmission so that the energy is going from where we can generate it to where it's needed. Okay, but there are some roadblocks, right? Like Senator Snowball from our last hour. some senators are saying that power plants and the electric grid aren't actually infrastructure. The only thing they can put in their brains about infrastructure are roads and bridges. Yeah. Tell that to the Texans who lost electricity and heat this winter because power plants stalled out because they weren't designed to operate at those temperatures, so they didn't. In Minnesota, the same kind of power plants run in those cold temperatures, but Texas hadn't required that. So I leave you with this suggestion for your tonight's Action Power Hour. Call your senators and representatives and tell them that energy production and transmission are key to our national infrastructure, that you support a national clean energy standard, that you support a grid that will deliver clean energy throughout the country, and that we have to do this by 2035 because of this. So let's get to this.